This is Maury Miller, and it is August 12th, 2014, and I'm conversing with Dale Huffington. So let me ask you some of the same questions. Where and when were you born?
I was born April 6, 1933.
Okay.
Our home was in Darwin Township, about 5 miles north of West Union. The home place is no longer there, but part of my family still is in the home place, or
Okay.
on the home place,
Okay.
I should say.
Well, let's talk about your family. You had brothers and sisters?
My mother and father had 6 children, 4 who survived infancy. I'm the youngest of those 4. Older brother Jack, EJ, as we call Jack, had a sister who's no longer living, Betty. Brother Dean, still living, near the home place, and myself.
Okay. Who were your parents?
Fred and Beulah Huffington.
Okay. And what kind of work did they do?
Well, my dad primarily was a school teacher, a rural school teacher. My mother was a homemaker. Dad started teaching when he was 17 years old. First school was in Macklin School in Wabash Township, and in those days they just taught by the quarter, and you were hired by the school trustees. You might teach there 1 quarter, you might teach there multiple years, but he taught in Macklin, in a school called Fishback, and then down near your neck of the woods, I can't think of the name of it, but he taught at Walnut Prairie, taught at West Hall, yeah.
Okay.
Taught at Walnut Prairie, taught at West Union, and in my day he taught in Crow, which was southwest of West Union. And then he was employed to operate the bookmobile in Clark County. The bookmobile was a system that moved library books from rural school to rural school to rural school. Okay. And he and my mother helped him, did that for a few years, and then he was elected county superintendent of schools. But he was in that position for 12 years.
Okay. So you grew up in Marshall, went to school where?
Well, we grew up on a home place in Darwin Township. Started school at Crow. My dad was teaching there.
Was that a one-room school?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I was in the 2nd grade when he took the job with the bookmobile, and at that time he brought me to Marshall. We were still living in the country, and he of course came in every day, and I rode with him. 3rd grade I was at South School. 3rd and 4th grade I was at South School, which is the old building, no longer there. And then I had an aunt, my dad's sister, who taught at we called it Snyder, actually it was Sherman School. And he thought I should go to school to my Aunt Ethel. So I went to Snyder for a year and a half, came back, finished in the Marshall system, graduated from the 8th grade in the old South building, and then went to high school.
Well, let's talk about some of the things you did as a boy. You grew up in a fairly big family. Did you have playmates? What kinds of things did you like to do?
Well, being the youngest, I always felt like my older siblings harassed me. They didn't really, but I was thinking about that when you was talking with Joanne. I didn't have playmates. There was no...
You had no close neighbors?
No, there were no neighbors with youngsters my age, so I made my own playtime.
Well, let's talk about that. What kinds of things did you do? What kinds of things did you like to do?
Oh, we had livestock, and you know, always played in the barn. My mother always raised a big garden, and I played in the garden. We had dogs, we had cats, of course had chickens. I think about this a lot. I don't ever recall feeling that I needed something to do. I was never bored. I did little things. Sometimes I'd go to the field when my dad was, of course, being a teacher, he was gone through the week, but on weekends sometimes I'd go to the field with him, and always went to the barn when they did the chores. They milked the cows, fed the hogs, fed the horses.
Now, did you have particular things that you were responsible for?
Well, when I was old enough, which was 5 or 6, chickens were my responsibility. I fed the chickens and gathered the eggs, and my mother gave me an allowance, which she got out of when she sold her eggs and sold the chicken. I got 50 cents a week, and that was my allowance for taking care of the chickens. I would, of course, they milk cows, and to feed the cows during when they was milking, we broke up corn. We broke up ear corn, and that was my job. And when I got a little bigger, we said we sloughed the hogs. My folks sold milk. There was a cheese factory in Marshall, and they took the raw milk and then brought back whey, which was what was left after the butter fat was taken out of the milk, and fed that to the hogs. And you'd mix that with bran, which was a purchased item, and slop the hogs. And that was always a kind of a rowdy but interesting job. Hogs, of course, there was no confinement at that time. They ran loose, and most of the hogs that the folks raised, they butchered, and that was food. And so I fed the hogs when I was big enough to. Broke up the corn, fed the chickens.
Did you do 4-H as well?
Nope, no 4-H in my life.
Okay. Well, what did you have hobbies? Did you have other things that you particularly like to spend your time doing?
No, more hobbies came later. Hobbies kind of came at high school, and we had an industrial arts teacher. What was his name? Porter, I think was his name. And he was kind of a model airplane addict, I'm going to say. So I was kind of interested in that. I don't remember anything other than that in a way.
Well, let's talk about school a while. What other things do you remember about school?
Grade school. Grade school, as I said, started in Crow. Maybe 8 or 10 at the most in the school, all 8 grades. I kind of laughingly say sometimes I took the first grade over about 3 years because my dad would take me to school when I was probably started about 4 years old, and so started there, came into the Marshall system a little bit later, and then high school.
What about high school?
Well, we lived within, at that time we lived about a block from the high school. I had a job during high school when, let's see, in about the I guess 6th or 7th grade, I had a job as a paper carrier, and then I got into high school and took a job in a grocery store. Worked for a man by the name of Bill Pierce. He had a store, and the building is still there. And lived, like I said, within a block of high school, so I come home for lunch, was able to walk to school, no car, and I guess that's about my life. Had good friends who remained friends, and the routine high school endeavors, the girls and the friends, and we won't talk about girls while Brian's here.
Well, then, after school, what did you do?
Well, after high school,
Mm-hmm.
I went to Indiana State for a couple of years. Indiana State was a good experience. I had a good time. I played a lot. Didn't do too well in college. At that time, I was on a pre-med program and wasn't doing well. I was passing, but just passing. So I enlisted in the Marine Corps after 2 years at Indiana State. Enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1953, and was there for 3 years. Come back.
Where were you in the Marine Corps?
I never left the States. I took my basic training in San Diego, combat training in Camp Pendleton, which is in California. Had an interesting experience. I was in Camp Pendleton. I came back home on a 30-day leave and went back to check in, and that was at the wind down of the Korean War. And I was scheduled to go to Korea. But there was a clerk who was checking me in. And back to my time at Indiana State, I belonged to a fraternity at Indiana State, Theta Chi. And this man happened to be a fraternity brother, the clerk in California. And we visited a little bit, and his question to me, he says, "Do you want to go to Korea?" Well, not especially. And he said, "Well, I have a job available in Barstow," which was a Marine Corps supply depot. And I said, "That sounds better than Korea." Mm-hmm. So I went there and stayed there until I was discharged in 1956. Had a job there that kind of molded, I guess, my career in electronics. I worked in an IBM installation, machine accounting is what it amounted to. And I was, after a period of time, I was responsible for civilian payroll. There was, on that base, there was about 2,500 civilians worked there. And in the machine accounting, we were responsible to process the payroll, cut the checks, and that's what I did. And that kind of tuned me to a career in that. I enjoyed that kind of work, and that's what I did.
So after the Marines, you came back to Marshall?
Came back to Marshall. Took some aptitude tests, if you will, in St. Louis to help me, and I was suggested that I do that, help me decide where my interests lie. And those tests showed an interest in electronics. And I went to DeVry Technical Institute in Chicago, and I was there, earned an associate degree in applied science, and finished up there, got married shortly after we finished, and got a job in Marshall in what was then Radio Industries, and kind of the rest is history.
Okay, so what was your job in Marshall?
I was in time study, industrial engineering and time study. That plant operated on an incentive program. There was a basic minimum wage, and plus the ability to earn some incentive each week. And my job to set those labor standards.
Okay. So did you stay there in Marshall?
Yes, I did. I stayed there. You were asking me for some dates here. I see. I started there in '58. In 62 or 63, the company built a factory in Casey, and I was moved there as an assistant plant manager, and was in Casey until about 1969 or so, and I was moved back to Marshall, and then in 1970, I believe it was, I left the company and started a little factory in Jasonville, and that's how we happened to move there. Moved there, I think, in 1970.
Okay. And you stayed how long there?
Was there until '73. That was a little plant. The company was Underwood Electric, based in Maywood, Illinois. And I kept that plant open till '73, and through some Jasonville was a coal mining territory, and as such, it was predominantly a union area, and we were not a union company. So we closed the Jasonville factory and built a new plant in Casey, and then I was there until '75, I believe.
So did you move to Casey, or did you live in?
No, we lived here.
Okay.
Drove back and forth.
Okay. Okay. Well, Joanne's told me the story about you two getting together and getting married. I'd like to hear your version of that story.
Well, I think she told it pretty well. I was when I was in school at DeVry, I lived in a little apartment. I cooked for myself and batched for myself, and you know, I knew I didn't like that life very well. And I was kind of footloose and fancy free, and I guess my sister-in-law, as Joanne related to you, she felt like it was time that I was finding a lady, and she pointed out this lady in Anderson Township to me. I went to a 4-H meeting, I think it was.
No, it was a YF meeting.
A YF meeting?
That's a church youth group meeting.
Joanne's church youth group was having a YF meeting at the Ray Thompson house. And I went out there to kind of look, to scope things out. And we didn't get together that evening, but I saw Joanne, and you know, I guess I liked what I saw. And later on then, I don't know whether it was probably the next day or so, I called her, and she just refused to let me come. She said it was because she wasn't fixed. I think she had to check me out first, I don't know. But anyway, then we got together later on, and
So she probably had her spies out checking out.
Well, she had a cousin or two. Oddly enough, Morris, this cousin that Joanne talked about, Margie Walsh, Margie White, her husband was a cousin of mine. So we had kind of cross relations there. And I'm sure that the two kind of talked and discussed this. I don't know that. I wasn't privy to that information, but yeah, I was home.
She asked me if I'd go out with you if you asked me, and I said, oh, I don't know, probably.
But you know, it was kind of an interesting story. One time, Joanne's granddad had some hogs and cattle, and he used to buy feed in Marshall at the co-op, and my dad did also. My dad had retired by then, and they would see each other at the co-op, and Joanne's granddad told my dad, said, you know, I think that's a match. Now, I don't know, we hadn't been going together too long by that time, but anyway, we stayed together and have had a good life together.
Now, children came into your life?
We had, let's see, I was 25 when we married, and at 35, Joanne and I adopted our daughter Dale Ann, and only one daughter, and she's our pride and joy.
Okay, okay. Now let's just talk about some other kinds of things. Some of the same kinds of questions I asked Joanne. Have particular people that you remember that have made a mark in your life?
Oh my, Morris. You know, it goes back to early school. My dad certainly influenced my life. He was my teacher and influenced me from that perspective. My mother was a great lady, and she, you know, influence sometimes comes at the end of a stick, but my dad, he believed wholeheartedly in capital punishment. I can assure you of that. But I remember in school to my dad, only 2 whippings I've had in school, and they both come from him in the 1st and 2nd grade, and both were for swearing. And my mother come from the same school. When my mother told me to do something, she didn't want any backed off. She told me to do it. She expected me to do it. And I don't remember the episode. I just remember the end of the episode was that I ran from my mother. And I'm running down the road just as hard as I can, and my mother's right on my heels. And I can remember her saying, Dale, the further you run, the harder I'm going to whip. And I run out of air before she did. And believe me, she
kept her
practiced
promise.
what she preached. Influence, I don't know. I had two brothers, Jack and Dean, and a sister. Obviously, both have influenced my life. Later in my life, the church. I can't necessarily name a personage who was involved, but that's been a tremendous influence in my life. My daughter certainly changed. I was a little older when she came along at 35. That makes a change in your life when you have children and you have the responsibility of children. I worked for a man that I'd have to add a man by the name of Bob Charles. Worked for Bob for I guess 20 years, and had a good relationship with him, and both in and out of work. Think about him a lot, and he influenced my work ethic, I think, and had a big influence on where I went with my career.
Well, what other things do you remember? Do you remember particular things about in historical events, maybe nationally or maybe just locally, things that happened, changes, things that have changed that you think about, that you remember?
Well, you know, I'm not sure it has to do with incidents, but I remember 4th of July. My dad had a brother who lived in Gary, worked in the steel mills, and they always came down on the 4th of July, and we always had a fireworks, just the family, you know, and a lot of good memories there. In 1941, I was in the 3rd grade, and my dad had taken me to school at the South School here in Marshall, and let me out, and I walked up the front walk to the school, and a young girl, my classmate by the name of Phyllis Baker. Phyllis's dad was an officer in the Navy, and I remember Phyllis coming out the front door, and of course her dad being in the Navy, she, you know, it was a big fear for them, and when they bombed Pearl Harbor. But Phyllis's comment to me, "Did you know we're at war?" And to me that didn't mean a whole lot to a 3rd grader then, but I know it meant a lot to her. And I remember that day. Joanne and I were living in Jasonville, and I must have been 1970 when they landed on the moon. Don't remember the names, but Dale Ann was big-eyed and watching on the TV then as this man walked on the moon. What was his name? Can't remember. Anyway, an incident, a memory in my life.
Let's talk about some other changes that have happened in your life. We've talked about inventions, conveniences, things that have changed. What most do you remember?
Morris, when you was talking to Joanne, I thought about this. When I was in the Marine Corps, I was responsible for civilian payroll, and we had a computer in 1953 or 54, an IBM computer, a model 602A. That one machine and card punch machine combined, probably as large as this room. And you know, today that thing there would probably outcompute and outperform that IBM 602A. And so many, and being in our whole system in that job was operated from punch cards, and we had to key punch the holes in the cards. We had to list. Everything was multiple. You know, I had lots of backup, a lot of hard copy on stuff, a lot of paper was generated, and I just see that every time this day, this computer age, there's been such a change, and that's not been all that long. That was in the early 50s, and here we are 60-some years later, and such a change. Tractors, being a kind of a weekend farmer, as a kid, after horses, my dad farmed about 250 acres and taught school, but he did that with one tractor, John Deere A in my time. Before that was an old GP John Deere, but the John Deere A pulled a 2-bottom plow, and horses planted the crop, horses cultivated the crop, and main strength and awkwardness harvested the crop.
Oh, I remember the sound of those 2-cylinder John Deeres.
The old putt John Deeres. And kind of a funny thing, I want to tell you this. Don't remember how old I was. I was maybe 3 years old, 4 years old. I asked my mother, it was getting along toward the evening, and Dad always come in to do the chores. And I asked my mother, can I go where Dad's working and come in with him. Yeah, that'd be all right. Well, I was listening to that John Deere, and I rode that. I was on a tricycle, and I rode that tricycle. I went to the wrong place, and I'll never understand what happened. You could hear a John Deere all over the country. I rode that tricycle probably a mile and a half in the field. There was a dirt road around the edge of the field, and I'm chucking along on my tricycle, and my dad come in, and no Dale. So Mother sent my brother Dean to look for me, and Dean tracked me in the dust in that dirt road. He tracked my tricycle, and he found me and took me home. But I always think about that when I think about the old two-cylinder John Deere. And but I don't know, never know whether I was hearing another one off in the distance or what. But I went a long ways on that tricycle. I went down a steep hill. I went across an old wooden rickety bridge, but you know, I was safe. And
you knew what you were doing. So
I knew exactly what I was doing, but my mother didn't.
Well, I have one more thing to ask you. If you were to talk to somebody who was not from Marshall, from around here, and were telling why you lived here and kind of saying, you know, what is good about Marshall, what kinds of things would you say?
Oh my. You know, Morris, first of all, when I was discharged from the Marine Corps, I had an opportunity to stay with IBM, but I wanted to come home. When I finished school at DeVry, I interviewed again. I guess it was with IBM, and they offered me a job. I would have started in Minnesota. And Joanne and I talked about that, and of course she wasn't sure about leaving Marshall, but I didn't really want to leave Marshall either. So I come home. Some years later, Joanne and I moved to Indiana. We liked living in Indiana, had a good time, but we come home. Now, what is there about this place that keeps drawing us back? You know, first of all, there's family, and this is where our roots are. That means nothing to a stranger. Well, why do you come to Marshall? It's a small town. Nearly, at least at an earlier time, everybody knew everybody else. Not so much today, but it's a town where you can become involved. You can become involved in a church, and you can build a church family. I've lived in California. Joanne and I lived in Indiana, and lived and worked in Chicago for a period of time. But we always come back here, and I just, it's a good place to live. You can, I told a story just at church Sunday about going out the other day when it was raining, and it was so quiet I could hear the rain on the corn. And, you know, I cherish that quietness, which, you know, I'm sure there's other parts and places in the world that have the same, but the quietness, the home, the people, it's a good life here.
Well, I want to thank you for the conversation here, letting me come into your home this afternoon.